You find yourself standing on a barren hillside, overlooking Mycenae, squinting through a choking cloud of dust. The morning sun casts a pale, indifferent glow over the landscape, illuminating a chaotic spectacle unfolding before your eyes. Men, dozens of them, scuttle about like ants beneath your gaze, each performing tasks whose urgency seems questionable at best. You've seen many construction sites in your wandering travels, but nothing quite matches the grandeur and futility of what is happening here. From your position, safely removed from the sweat and strain, you watch as massive stone blocks, rough and quarried from distant hillsides, are dragged slowly toward their resting places. Ropes creak, voices bark commands, and occasionally a muffled curse echoes into the morning air. The sheer magnitude of human effort spent dragging these stones strikes you as ironically humorous. How many weeks, months, even years of human life have been sacrificed just so that some ruler, long forgotten by history, can rest easy behind thick walls? The absurdity of it all leaves a dull, bitter taste in your mouth. Nearby, a crew of weary laborers strains against the weight of a limestone slab, their backs bent and muscles quivering. Sweat runs down their foreheads and mingles with the dust, creating tiny streams of grime. You watch, mildly amused, as a foreman stands to the side, shouting encouragements, or perhaps threats. It's difficult to distinguish one from the other, and you doubt the workers care much about the difference either. Pull harder, he bellows, his voice tinged with a desperation that borders on panic. The king wishes this wall completed before the harvest festival. You pause, reflecting grimly on the phrase, the king wishes. Indeed, you muse to yourself, kings often wish many impossible things. You wonder if this nameless king realizes how little his wishes will matter when centuries have reduced him and his dynasty to mere footnotes at best. But still, people toil tirelessly in his name, lending credence to a fragile fantasy of eternal security. A sudden gust of wind stirs the dust around your feet, making you cough and sputter. The workers below briefly disappear from sight, swallowed by swirling dirt. When visibility returns, you notice a particularly unlucky laborer has lost his grip, and a stone block has slid dangerously backward, nearly crushing his foot. Men shout angrily at one another, tempers flaring. Their brief fury provides you with a bleak sort of entertainment, a dark comedy at which only you seem capable of laughing. Your eyes drift toward a massive, almost finished section of the outer wall. Rising imposingly toward the sky, it promises protection and strength. Yet you know better. Walls, no matter how tall or thick, are only ever temporary solutions. They provide comfort to fearful hearts, giving humans a false sense of control over the chaos that inevitably surrounds them. As if reading your mind, an elderly laborer standing nearby leans heavily on his wooden staff and sighs deeply. His face is lined with wrinkles etched by decades of hard labor, disappointment, and perhaps a touch of quiet resignation. Catching your gaze, he offers a small, tired smile. You see, he mutters, gesturing toward the bustling construction site with a wave of his hand. We build, we sweat, we bleed, only for time to tear it down. Yet we keep building. You nod slowly in reply, feeling strangely connected to this old man who comprehends precisely what you've been thinking. He seems as weary as you feel, burdened by knowledge that renders pride meaningless. For a moment, silence hangs heavy between you both, punctuated only by the distant shouts of other laborers. Then, with another sigh, he shuffles away, leaving you alone with your thoughts once more. You observe again as teams of exhausted workers struggle on, each performing their tiny, repetitive tasks in service of grandiose ambitions. They work until their bodies fail, only to be replaced by new generations who will repeat the same actions, make identical mistakes, and harbor the same illusions of permanence. You consider briefly how historians, hundreds or perhaps thousands of years from now, will describe this scene. They'll likely mention the impressive walls, their thick stone blocks, and the advanced techniques required to assemble them. Yet they'll surely overlook the human cost, the mundane tragedies, and the endless monotony that truly built this city. Drawing a deep breath, you step down from your hilltop perch and walk toward the chaotic heart of the construction. The closer you come, the clearer details emerge: cracked skin, bloodied fingers, and eyes heavy with fatigue. You notice small details like discarded sandals and broken pottery shards scattered carelessly in the dust. Each artifact whispers an insignificant, forgotten story, proof of lives lived quietly, invisibly. Approaching the gates, you stop near a row of primitive shelters erected for workers. Inside one shack, you glimpse a woman carefully binding the blistered hands of a young man. She moves methodically, her expression neutral and dispassionate, as if such injuries are ordinary inconveniences, which of course they are. You wonder if she believes her patient's suffering holds any meaning. You suspect not, yet she continues working anyway. A shadow falls over you as a team of oxen trudges past, pulling an impossibly heavy slab. The animals seem resigned to their fate, much like the men driving them forward with whips and shouted encouragement. For a brief, dark moment, you consider whether there truly is much difference between the workers and these beasts. Both toil for masters who hardly acknowledge their existence. Both endure hardship for purposes beyond their comprehension. Suddenly, from somewhere deep within the crowd, a voice breaks into song. It's mournful and melancholy, carrying with it an unmistakable sense of resignation. Others soon join, their voices mingling into a chorus that underscores the futility of their efforts. You pause, closing your eyes to better appreciate the bleak beauty of their lament. The melody drifts slowly upward, mixing with dust and sunlight, until it fades, unheard by anyone who truly matters. When you reopen your eyes, the workers have resumed their labors, as if the song had never been sung. You stand there a moment longer, realizing just how little actually changes, despite humanity's frantic attempts to shape and control its destiny. The walls of Mycenae may indeed rise higher with each passing day, but in your heart, you know they will eventually crumble. With weary resignation, you turn away, deciding to continue your journey. Yet you cannot help but glance once more at the growing fortifications behind you. They loom large and imposing, symbols of both human determination and folly. You sigh quietly, acknowledging the bitter truth. Men will always build walls, and walls will always fall. But perhaps, you muse wryly, the true tragedy is not in the fall itself, but in mankind's stubborn refusal to accept it. You carry this grim thought with you as you walk away from Mycenae, leaving behind only the echoes of hammers, shouts, and that ever present, meaningless cloud of dust. You step deeper into the sprawling construction site at Mycenae, feeling the pressing weight of human labor and monotony. The dust seems thicker now, coating everything in a grayish film. Every breath tastes faintly of limestone and sweat, and every step stirs memories of futile labor. You marvel grimly at humanity's stubbornness in the face of certain impermanence. If you ever needed proof that history is merely a sequence of repetitive tragedies, surely Mycenae provides ample evidence. Around you, the builders continue their ceaseless toil, oblivious to the ironies evident only to a distant observer like yourself. They are absorbed in the urgency of the moment, their minds clouded by fatigue, their bodies driven by habit rather than hope. Each worker seems locked in a perpetual routine, performing tasks that have become so habitual that they border on meaningless ritual. You pause near a section of the outer wall, watching a wiry young man lift bricks mechanically, place them carefully, and repeat the motion with numbing consistency. His hands are cracked and rough, his movements precise yet robotic. You find yourself briefly hypnotized by this repetitive spectacle, wondering how many bricks he's laid and how many more he will place before his strength fails him entirely. A small group nearby murmurs quietly among themselves as they prepare mortar. You catch snippets of their weary conversation, overhearing mundane complaints about the taste of the water, the unrelenting heat of the sun, and petty quarrels over who was responsible for yesterday's faulty mixing. Their conversations are never about the purpose of their labor or the glory of the city they build. Rather, these men and women exist in a state of weary detachment, their lives governed by a predictable cycle of minor annoyances and minor triumphs that fade immediately into obscurity. You shift your gaze to a man pushing a cart laden with heavy stones. His bare feet leave shallow depressions in the dust, and the veins in his neck bulge as he struggles forward. He pauses briefly, wiping sweat from his brow, and casts a hollow glance toward the unfinished walls. For just a moment, you glimpse a spark of bitter awareness in his eyes, an understanding that his efforts mean little more than a fleeting illusion of progress. Then, dutifully and without protest, he continues on, just another nameless figure lost to history. Nearby, women carry water in clay jugs, balanced gracefully upon their heads, their movements practiced and graceful. They navigate the uneven terrain effortlessly, their eyes fixed ahead with resigned determination. A young girl follows closely behind, learning the art of quiet resignation from her elders. You watch this scene unfold, noting the way generations pass down skills that serve only to maintain their status as invisible cogs in the vast machinery of human ambition. As you wander further, you notice small tokens scattered around the worksite, charms and amulets left near doorways or tied to crude wooden scaffolds. Each of these items reflects a laborer's desperate desire for protection, for luck, or perhaps simply for an escape from monotony. The charms are adorned with faded symbols of gods long indifferent to the pleas of mortals. You recognize the grim irony here. The laborers rely on superstition to endure tasks that reason alone would render unbearable. Pausing to rest beneath a makeshift shelter, you overhear the whispered conversations of several older workers. They speak solemnly of past constructions, walls they built in other towns, temples erected elsewhere, fortresses completed and then promptly forgotten. Their stories are tinged with nostalgia, though you sense that even these nostalgic recollections are hollow attempts to find meaning in past futility. I once built a wall taller than this, one man insists quietly, his voice heavy with false pride. The king promised it would stand forever. And where is it now? Another asks dryly, already knowing the answer. The first man shrugs, gazing blankly into the distance. Gone, buried beneath sand, grass, and rubble. But we believed him. You almost laugh aloud at the absurdity of it. Humans, you reflect, are eternally trapped by this cycle of belief and disappointment, repeatedly tricked by promises that history has already disproven countless times. Moving again, you observe the smallest details of laborers' lives: scraps of discarded food, broken sandals hastily repaired, rudimentary tools cast aside when broken. Each artifact seems an insignificant marker of existence, a testament to the banality of human struggle. You imagine archaeologists from some distant future marveling at these remnants, wondering at their significance, never realizing how mundane, how utterly ordinary their true meanings were. You pause again near a particularly large group struggling to move a massive stone into position. Their shouts blend into an indistinct chorus of strained voices, each pulling against a rope, pushing from behind, or digging their feet stubbornly into the earth. Yet for all their effort, the stone barely inches forward. You wonder how many days they've been performing this singular, monotonous task, and how many more days lie ahead before they finally achieve their insignificant victory. As you watch, you become aware of a scribe seated nearby, recording some meaningless tally of stones placed and workers employed. His quill moves methodically across a clay tablet, his expression devoid of emotion. He records the progress as though it has meaning, as though numbers can ever fully capture the bleak repetition of human labor. You imagine future scholars reading these records with awe and reverence, never realizing that each tally mark represents only another day lost to purposeless toil. The sun has climbed higher, intensifying the heat and casting deeper shadows. Workers take brief pauses, drinking lukewarm water from chipped cups, but quickly resume their tasks. The entire site pulses with a rhythm of labor: pull, lift, stack, repeat, that never falters, never changes. Feeling the oppressive weight of this unending monotony, you begin to leave the construction area. Yet, as you turn back one final time, you see the young man who earlier had captured your attention, still lifting bricks, still placing them mechanically. He doesn't look up, doesn't notice you. Perhaps he never will. Perhaps it doesn't matter. You exit the construction site slowly, your mind burdened by a sense of inevitable repetition. You ponder the countless days these laborers have yet to endure, identical mornings, identical evenings, a relentless march toward completion of walls that will someday crumble regardless. With one last glance at the men and women moving in weary unison, you reflect grimly that their lives, too, like their labor, will vanish without trace. History will remember only the walls they built, never the endless days they suffered, nor the quiet despair with which they endured them. You wander away from the monotonous rhythm of manual labor and approach a secluded corner near the partially finished walls of Mycenae. Here, the air is thick not only with dust, but also with incense smoke, a smoky veil attempting to mask humanity's endless insecurity. You've stumbled upon a gathering of priests, men dressed in ceremonial robes so elaborate that you can't help but smirk at the sheer absurdity of their appearance amidst the dust and dirt of the construction site. You remain at a respectful distance, quietly observing their solemn rites. They chant in low voices, occasionally raising their arms toward the indifferent sky, as if demanding attention from gods, who, you suspect, care very little about this city or its ambitions. Their faces, stern and serious, belie the thin veil of desperation behind every prayer and gesture. You wonder silently if they truly believe their rituals might somehow alter fate, or if they, too, understand the futility of their actions. The priests encircle a makeshift altar, little more than rough stones stacked hastily upon one another. A goat, freshly sacrificed, lies atop this primitive altar, its lifeless eyes fixed blankly upward. The priests pour wine and honey onto the blood soaked stones, murmuring prayers for protection, wealth, and the favor of capricious deities who, historically speaking, have proven notoriously unreliable. You catch glimpses of nearby laborers, stopping briefly to observe this ceremony before shrugging and returning to their work. Clearly, their trust in divine intervention is limited. They've watched too many prayers rise unanswered and too many sacrifices fail to prevent tragedy, to hold much faith in the effectiveness of these elaborate gestures. Still, the priests persist, their voices becoming louder, more fervent, as though volume might somehow compel divine ears to listen. One elderly priest steps forward, holding an ornate bronze vessel. He dips his fingers into sacred oils, smearing symbols upon the altar and the unfinished walls nearby. His eyes are closed in passionate concentration, sweat beading on his wrinkled forehead. Watching him, you feel a twinge of pity for this man who, after a lifetime spent seeking reassurance from gods, must surely sense the bitter truth that no amount of ritual can prevent the inevitable march of time and decay. As the chanting reaches its climax, you notice an elegantly dressed nobleman standing near the ceremony. Unlike the priests, his expression lacks any genuine reverence, replaced instead with a thinly veiled impatience. He fidgets distractedly, clearly viewing this religious rite as a tedious formality. You realize immediately he must be one of the king's emissaries, a man who publicly supports these ceremonies for political necessity, but privately scoffs at their usefulness. You move closer to hear fragments of the conversation he quietly shares with an attendant. Are they nearly finished? The nobleman whispers irritably. This foolishness wastes precious time. The attendant nods nervously. Soon, my lord. But the priests insist that without these rites the walls might anger the gods. The nobleman snorts derisively. The gods! Let them come lay bricks if they care so deeply. You stifle a chuckle at his cynical pragmatism. Perhaps he alone here sees clearly that walls stand, not because gods wish it, but because humans stubbornly insist upon defying nature's indifference. Yet even this nobleman will eventually return to his palace, offering false gratitude for divine blessings, knowing that belief, even an empty one, holds power over the masses. Your attention returns to the priests, now raising their voices even louder in a final, fervent plea to the heavens. Their chants grow desperate, their gestures more exaggerated. The smoke from burning herbs thickens, creating an atmosphere both solemn and strangely comical. You consider briefly how easily faith can slip into absurdity when observed from an outsider's perspective. As their ritual concludes, the priests gather slowly, whispering nervously among themselves. You overhear their hushed concerns, worrying whether their offerings have truly pleased the gods. Their anxiety reveals a deeper truth. These holy men are terrified, uncertain, and grasping at symbols and ceremonies precisely because control is so utterly beyond their reach. Stepping away from the priests, you walk along the unfinished sections of wall, noting carefully inscribed symbols placed to ward off misfortune. You trace your finger over one, recognizing an invocation to a minor deity who supposedly prevents walls from collapsing prematurely. It's a faintly amusing idea, the thought of a god who dedicates eternity to propping up human constructions. Structures which inevitably crumble anyway. In the shadow of the immense walls, you spot an old woman seated alone, mumbling softly to herself. Approaching carefully, you hear her repeating prayers under her breath, hands trembling as she clutches a small clay amulet. You wonder what she hopes for, perhaps protection for a son or husband working on the wall, perhaps simply survival through another day. Her earnest sincerity contrasts sharply with the more cynical rituals performed by the official priests. You find her genuine belief strangely touching, yet equally tragic. Do you think they hear you? You quietly ask, surprising even yourself. She looks up slowly, eyes clouded by age and hardship. Maybe, she murmurs after a thoughtful pause. But does it matter? Sometimes hope is enough to get through one more day. You nod slowly, appreciating her quiet wisdom. Perhaps she understands something even the priests overlook, that faith, even absurd faith, serves a human purpose, not necessarily to change reality, but to soften its cruel edges. Leaving the old woman to her whispered devotions, you return your attention to the priests, now moving solemnly toward the palace gates. Behind them trails a small group of curious townsfolk, murmuring softly among themselves, debating whether today's rituals will indeed ensure safety and prosperity for Mycenae. You watch them leave, shaking your head slowly at humanity's eternal willingness to believe in symbols and rituals even when reality relentlessly mocks their efforts. Mycenae's walls will rise, completed by sweat and blood, not divine intervention. Yet still, the people cling to their comforting fictions, desperate for reassurance that their lives mean more than mere dust and stone. Turning away, you pass by the abandoned altar once more. The sacrificed goat now appears pitifully insignificant, its death a wasted offering to gods who remain distant and uninterested. You glance upward, observing the sky, empty, silent, and indifferent to the frantic rituals below. Walking away from the ceremonial site, you feel the burden of witnessing humanity's endless cycle of hope, disappointment, and renewed hope. Absurd though these rituals may be, you acknowledge their necessity in a world perpetually uncertain. After all, hope, even misguided, keeps despair at bay, at least for a while. You leave the priests behind, disappearing back into the noisy chaos of workers and dust, knowing that tomorrow another ceremony will be held, another sacrifice made, another desperate prayer whispered into silence. Walls rise and fall, cities flourish and fade, but humanity's absurd hope endures, stubbornly, endlessly. As you blend back into the anonymous bustle of Mycenae, you cannot help but feel a quiet admiration, tinged with profound irony, for humanity's ceaseless attempts to persuade indifferent gods to care about their fleeting lives. You walk slowly along the base of the rising walls of Mycenae, your shadow stretching before you in the fading light of late afternoon. The air feels heavier, charged not only with dust and sweat, but now with the unmistakable tension of impending disaster. Though the workers carry on as before, lifting, stacking, shouting orders, you sense an unease rippling quietly beneath their practiced movements. Ahead, near a freshly laid foundation, you notice a small cluster of workers speaking in hushed, agitated tones. Their eyes dart nervously from one another to the towering wall, back again, then down toward plans spread haphazardly across a rough hewn table. Intrigued by their unusual distress, you step closer, careful not to intrude, yet near enough to overhear. It's wrong, mutters a stonemason with an exhausted voice. You know it as well as I do. Lower your voice, snaps another man sharply, eyes narrowing. You recognize him by his decorated robe and authoritative stance, the chief architect himself. Usually calm, composed, and confident, today his appearance betrays fear and frustration. If they hear you, if they hear me, what? Retorts the stonemason bitterly. You think the wall cares who hears? The stones don't lie. The architect scowls and glances furtively toward the palace gates, then back down at his plans, fingers nervously tracing lines and angles, as though wishing reality itself could shift along with them. You watch quietly, understanding precisely what's unfolding here. A fundamental mistake has been made, likely irreparable at this stage, yet hidden behind layers of pride and fear. The wall, meant as a glorious testament to human ingenuity, now stands poised to become yet another monument to human arrogance. You cannot suppress the dry, ironic smile that briefly flickers across your lips. Explain it again. The architect sighs, desperation edging his tone. The stonemason leans forward, jabbing at the plans with calloused fingers. Here, you calculated the weight incorrectly. This section here is unsupported. You've placed the stones unevenly, with the rains and the winds, perhaps not today or tomorrow, but soon, certainly, this wall will collapse, and when it does, everything above it goes as well. You watch the architect's expression shift from denial to anger, then settle into a grim, weary acceptance. He shakes his head, shoulders slumping, and exhales deeply. Can we reinforce it quickly? The mason shrugs, glancing again at the towering edifice. We can pretend, yes. A brace here, additional mortar there. Temporary fixes at best. But the flaw remains, hidden beneath stone and mortar, waiting for its inevitable moment to reveal itself. The architect presses his fingers against his temples, as if trying to physically hold back the catastrophe he's unleashed through miscalculation. You almost pity him, but not quite. History, you know all too well, is littered with men exactly like him, talented, ambitious, but ultimately human, vulnerable to error, pride, and denial. You must say nothing, the architect finally commands, voice tight with anxiety. I will speak privately with the king's adviser, perhaps. Perhaps what? Interrupts the stonemason harshly. Perhaps he will order the stones to behave differently. Perhaps the gods will alter the laws of gravity because you made a mistake. The architect's face flushes red with anger and humiliation. Enough. Just reinforce it quietly. Do what you can. It must not be known. If this becomes common knowledge, it will be my head, and perhaps yours. The mason sighs deeply, nodding slowly. He understands that ultimately, even disaster must be delayed and hidden as long as possible. The illusion of security, he knows, matters far more than truth in the kingdom of men. You watch as the architect departs hurriedly toward the palace, leaving the mason and his companions to stare solemnly at the flawed structure towering ominously above them. The mason glances upward, his expression a mix of resentment and resignation. You move quietly to stand beside him, breaking your customary silence. Will it really fall? You ask, your voice low. He turns slowly, as if noticing your presence for the first time, and studies your face before replying with quiet bitterness. All walls fall eventually, but this one will collapse sooner than it should. Yet perhaps no one will live to remember why. You nod thoughtfully. The mason's words capture precisely what you've always suspected. Human mistakes are inevitable, yet seldom remembered or acknowledged. Cities are built upon flawed foundations, walls upon false calculations, civilizations upon arrogance, and always the architects and kings who commission these monuments insist they will last forever. Night begins to fall, and you remain near the troubled construction, observing laborers hurriedly attempting superficial repairs. Additional wooden supports appear, hurriedly hammered into place, thin ropes and extra mortar hastily applied. To your eyes, These desperate efforts appear almost laughably inadequate, merely delaying a disaster already embedded deeply within the foundations. Later, as torches flicker softly in the evening darkness, you overhear a quiet conversation among younger workers, unaware of the gravity behind their task. They speculate cheerfully about the upcoming celebration of the wall's completion, imagining feasts and praise and rewards they might receive from the grateful king. You listen sadly, aware they're building not just a wall, but an illusion of strength that will inevitably shatter. And when that moment arrives, it is always the innocent, the laborers, the townspeople, the forgotten ones who suffer most. Eventually, the workers disperse, their temporary repairs complete, and you're left alone in the cool darkness. You walk slowly along the now silent, shadowed walls, feeling the heavy irony of what you've witnessed. The flaw in Mycenae's design isn't just in stones and mortar, but in the human heart itself, in humanity's ceaseless arrogance and prideful belief that perfection can ever be achieved. Looking up at the massive structure silhouetted against the stars, you briefly imagine the inevitable future, the wall cracking, crumbling, collapsing under the pressure of an error buried beneath its surface. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps years from now, but collapse it surely will, as all flawed things eventually must. You consider how generations hence, historians will debate why Mycenae fell, never knowing about the secret you carry tonight. They will blame invasions, earthquakes, angry gods, but never human error, never a simple miscalculation by a proud architect unwilling to admit his mistake. With quiet resignation, you continue your walk through the sleeping city, reflecting bitterly on humanity's stubborn refusal to learn from history. Architects will continue to build, mistakes will continue to be hidden, walls will rise and inevitably fall, and always, always, history will bury the truth beneath more convenient stories. As dawn breaks softly over Mycenae, bathing the ancient stones in a faint golden glow, you find yourself once again drawn to the great wall that now encircles the city like a heavy necklace of misguided pride. It is nearly complete, a testament to human stubbornness, ingenuity, and futility, all wrapped up neatly in layers of stone and mortar. You stand before the main gates, gazing upward at the colossal stones, each placed by aching hands, now long forgotten, their fingerprints worn smooth by wind, rain, and time. You recall the exhausted workers you watched weeks ago, whose labor, tears, and blood built this fortress, whose desperate prayers rose unheard toward indifferent skies. All that remains of their lives now is this silent structure, monumental, yet ultimately meaningless. Slowly, your eyes wander over the walls, lingering on the spot where the hidden flaw lies silently beneath the surface. A faint, ironic smile touches your lips. Perhaps you alone truly understand that the great walls of Mycenae, for all their apparent solidity, conceal weaknesses destined to be their undoing. You consider briefly how symbolic this is of every human achievement, grand facades masking deep, inherent imperfections. Around you, the city stirs slowly awake. People shuffle quietly into streets that quickly fill with noise, activity, and routine. Bakers set out bread, merchants arrange their wares, children play games in alleyways. Life continues, oblivious to the quiet prophecy whispered by stone that nothing humans build can truly outlast the relentless march of time. You wander slowly through these crowded streets, noting the countless small details of daily life. Pottery stands stacked in precarious towers. Freshly washed clothes flutter gently in the morning breeze. Craftsmen shout to one another above the din of early commerce. You wonder idly how many mornings like this remain before Mycenae's flaw reveals itself in full, tearing the illusion apart and scattering lives like dust. You pause beside a small marketplace, listening to old men argue passionately about politics and trade. Their voices carry loudly, full of conviction and certainty, as though their opinions might somehow alter fate itself. They debate passionately about kings, armies, and gods, never realizing their arguments are no more permanent or meaningful than the dust beneath their feet. Turning away from their heated debates, you walk toward the city's highest point, stopping only when you reach a vantage point overlooking Mycenae. From here, the city spreads below like a mosaic of humanity, busy, vibrant, and doomed. You gaze down silently, reflecting on how brief and fragile human existence truly is, despite all attempts to deny this truth. Your attention returns inevitably to the towering walls, visible clearly from your elevated position. They seem unshakable from afar, solid and permanent, a testament to humanity's defiance against chaos. Yet you, perhaps alone, understand the deep irony that underpins this structure. Walls built as a protection inevitably become prisons, and fortifications intended to safeguard lives often ensure their eventual destruction. You imagine the day when the hidden flaw finally emerges, sending stones cascading to earth in a violent spectacle of collapse. Will the people below even comprehend the reason for their tragedy? Likely not. History has a way of burying uncomfortable truths beneath simpler stories: earthquakes, enemy attacks, angry gods. It is always easier to blame external forces rather than acknowledge humanity's endless capacity for error and pride. Standing here, overlooking the city, you quietly predict the inevitable aftermath. Stunned survivors picking through rubble, priests desperately invoking indifferent gods for answers, kings ordering new walls erected, this time surely stronger and more permanent. Yet again, humans will ignore the grim lessons etched clearly into every fallen stone. Your eyes drift slowly to a distant hill where an old cemetery lies silent and forgotten, half covered by grass and vines. Each grave there represents someone who once lived, laughed, loved, now reduced to anonymity. You wonder briefly how many of them died building the walls that will soon betray their descendants. History, you reflect bitterly, is filled with forgotten souls who sacrificed everything for illusions of permanence. In the coolness of morning, a gentle breeze rises, brushing softly against your face. You close your eyes briefly, savoring the quiet simplicity of this moment, knowing it too is fleeting. Soon, Mycenae will awaken fully, filling the air with noise, dust, and urgency, distracting its inhabitants from truths they prefer not to face. Descending slowly from your vantage point, you pass by clusters of workers already returning to their labors, repairing, reinforcing, extending the city's walls. You recognize their faces from before, worn, exhausted, yet still determined. They toil as though unaware of the inevitability of their work's eventual ruin. Perhaps they genuinely believe each stone placed today ensures their future safety, or perhaps they simply choose not to contemplate the harshness of reality. Either way, they continue their labor with relentless resolve. Approaching the main gates once again, you pause to study the newly carved symbols, invocations of protection and permanence. You run your fingers lightly over their smooth surface, smiling grimly at their hopeful naivety. Humans have always placed excessive faith in symbols, believing they possess power enough to alter fate. But fate is indifferent to carvings, prayers, and good intentions, following instead a logic rooted firmly in decay and eventual collapse. You finally step away from Mycenae's looming walls, taking one last lingering glance backward. They stand imposing, magnificent, flawed, an eternal symbol of humanity's refusal to accept the transience of life. You consider how, centuries from now, travelers will stand precisely where you do now, gazing at ruins and pondering questions whose answers lie long buried beneath rubble and time. You walk away quietly, passing beneath trees whose roots already pry gently at the edges of the wall's foundations, subtly whispering promises of reclamation. Nature, patient and unyielding, knows no hurry. It waits calmly for inevitable victories. As you move farther from Mycenae, you reflect quietly that the people of this city, like all humans everywhere, are destined to disappear. Their names, faces, and dreams will fade gradually into obscurity. Yet the walls they built, flawed and temporary though they are, will linger a while longer, slowly collapsing into the earth until they too vanish, leaving only silence behind. And perhaps that, you realize, is humanity's greatest folly, the desperate attempt to build eternity from stones, illusions, and stubborn hope, forever forgetting that eternity belongs to dust, wind, and quiet forgetfulness. With that thought, you continue your journey away from Mycenae, leaving behind only echoes of futile labors, misplaced hopes, and inevitable collapse. Walls rise and fall, cities bloom and crumble, but human arrogance endures unchanged. Walking toward the open road ahead, you carry with you the ironic knowledge that someday travelers like yourself will pause at the ruins of Mycenae, marveling at the foolish pride that inspired men to build walls against fate itself. They will gaze upon fallen stones and broken towers, wondering idly how such greatness could fall to ruin. And perhaps, like you, they'll eventually realize the quiet truth whispered clearly by every ruined stone, every forgotten grave, every vanished city. The wall remains for a time, but people never do.